There's kind of a new color that's kind of the standard of switching between these modes on all the Nikon cameras. And so you have a color that's switched up and down depending on whether you want to be in the live view or movie mode. They're related very, very closely, but they are different as to whether you want to shoot still pictures in the live view mode or you want to shoot video in the movie mode. And so first off, use the live view selector to select which one you want, and then you would press the button in the middle to activate it and kind of turn it on. So let's talk about these two modes in more detail. All right, so you hit the live view mode and suddenly you get to see a little TV view of what is happening right in front of you. Now, one of the first things that you can do is play around a little bit with the button right below it, which is the info button. Some people like to see lots of information about the shutter speed, aperture, other recording data that's going on. Other times you just want to see the image that you're actually pointing the camera at. There's a framing guidelines, so if you want to level the horizon. There's also a virtual horizon. Kind of looks like something, an indicator out of an airplane. Help you level the horizon from left and right to make sure your camera's not tilted. If you want, you can go back to that I button and you can start controlling some of the features about whether you're in live view or movie mode. And so that'll give you quick access to some of those menu features without having to jump back all the way into the menu setting. Now, the thing that we need to address about working in live view and movie mode is that the autofocus system of the camera is different here than it is under normal circumstances. In the normal shooting mode of this camera, the main mirror is what is known as a partial mirror. It's partially silvered in the middle, and this is where the camera is going to be focusing. You can see through the mirror if you take a very close look at it. And the reason it is partially silvered is so that it can let some light through, bounces around on a couple of mirrors, and goes down to an autofocus sensor in the camera. This is how your camera focuses when you are looking through the camera. All right, in case you've ever wondered, I'm looking through the camera, how does it know what to focus on? Well, this is how it's doing it. Now, here's the problem. When you put the camera into the live view mode, the mirror goes up, the shutter curtain opens, and light goes straight back to the sensor. And look at that autofocus sensor. How much information is it getting? It's like it's completely in the dark as to what's going on. And this is why cameras can't use their traditional, very fast focusing system in the live view or the movie mode. All right, so it's got to use a different system for focusing. And what it does is it takes the image landing on the sensor and it uses contrast to figure out if it's in focus or not. If it's contrasty, it's in focus. If it's all fuzzy, it's not in focus, and it changes the lens. And it's not as quick at figuring out how to fix the focusing of the lens. And so focusing in live view and movie mode is different than the standard mode on the camera. Now, by pressing the button on the side of the camera over where you would press the release button on the lens, there is a button that we haven't quite officially talked about yet. But by pressing that button and turning the sub-command dial out in the front of the camera, you will change what is known as the AF area mode. This is where your camera chooses to look to focus. And option number 1 is it'll choose faces. And it's going to look for a face, and it actually has a pretty good job at recognizing faces. It's not my favorite mode because what if you have two people at different distances and you don't want the one that it's choosing? If you're just choosing a single person, it might work okay. Next, it has a wide area and a normal area, and these are just different size boxes. And you can choose to move these boxes left, right, top, and bottom, moving them around the frame with the little multi-selector in the back of the camera. And those are my favorite. I prefer the wide area just because it's a little bit larger area to work with on the subjects. Now, the camera also has a subject tracking system that looks for subjects that are moving and tries to track their whereabouts as they move left and right. And this might be pretty good, let's say if you have a kid that's kind of running around and unpredictable about where they're going in the frame. It's a little subjective. The camera is using some algorithms to try to figure out what's going on, so it's a little hard to predict exactly what the camera is going to do. You can experiment with it, but most people, I think, often keep to the wide or normal area. By pressing that same button and turning the back dial on the camera, you will be changing the focusing mode, and this is choosing how it focuses rather than where it focuses. The first option is AFS for single, which means the camera will focus on a subject, and as soon as it confidently figures out which subject that is and where it is, it stops focusing. And this is pretty good. It also has a full-time focus, AFF, where the camera is constantly adjusting, and this is kind of the way traditional movie cameras have worked. They're constantly adjusting, so if somebody walks closer to the camera, it adjusts for it. The problem is that in the full-time mode, the focusing is kind of slow. Even in the single mode, it's kind of slow and it takes a while to acquire its subject. The people who are using a camera like this for shooting video are often manually focusing. They focus on their subject ahead of time, they shoot their little shot, 5-10 second clip, and then they stop recording and then they set up for the next shot. It's a little bit cumbersome, but because of that focusing problem I talked about before, focusing is not really fast and accurate on this for changing. And so don't plan to shoot, let's say, a basketball game in full autofocus with subjects running towards you and away from you and the camera tracking every movement. It will try to follow it, but it's going to lag behind and it's going to be quite slow. There's nothing wrong with the camera as far as defective. It's just not built for that type of autofocusing system.
John, really quick, Michael in SoCal asks, how do you turn on the face detection feature? Is that the same thing as the face priority?
The face detection for live view is turned on right here. So you press the focusing button over on the side of the camera. As you have your finger down on that, so I'll do it right here on this camera, so I'll press down on this button here, and then you turn the front mode right here. And I'll actually turn the camera so our other camera can see it. I'll need to throw this into live view. We don't have a very exciting scene in there, but that's not the point right now. And so I've got to make sure that my camera is in autofocus. That always helps. And so if I press that button in, you'll see a couple things in yellow on frame, and I can change it to face detection mode, and it will look for faces. And you'll see the little happy face there. And so that's how you get that turned on. All right, so if you do have it in the movie mode, some things to be aware of as far as the movies that you shoot are what are called .movie files. They're pretty common. You can watch them very easily on PCs, and Apple's running modern software, so you can use them for just about anything these days. Let's see what else we got. We do have a limit, a 4 gigabyte file, after which time the camera will stop recording, and a 30-minute limit at full resolution, and so you can only go 30 limits. And just in case anyone's wondering, Nikon could make it 31 minutes or 60 minutes, but there's extra taxes that are employed on cameras that go over 30 minutes because they're considered video cameras. And they have special taxes, and the camera would cost more. And the cameras also have a sensor that would heat up, which would not do well for more than 30 minutes. And so that's why they cut it at 30 minutes. One of the gripes about this camera and about other Nikon cameras is that when you are in the movie mode and you have engaged the movie mode, you cannot control the aperture. And this is a big feature that a lot of people shooting video want to be able to do, is they want to shoot it at 2.8 and shoot this one at f8. And what you have to do is you have to exit the movie mode, change the aperture, and go back in. People aren't happy with this. There's nothing technically wrong with the camera, but that's the way it works. It's just been a bit of a gripe, and it's not that hard to work around, but it could be better. You have different resolutions and frame rates for the camera. I'll get in later on how and where to change it, but just be aware right now, 1920 by 1080 is known as full HD, and so that's the highest resolution it'll shoot at. It has different frame rates that you can shoot at. Some are common to different parts of the world than others. For instance, 25p is common in Europe. 30p would be common in the United States. You'll be able to get into these through the shooting menu called Movie Settings. You can go in and you can change the frame rate and resolution. Now you can shoot at 60i if you are shooting with the 1.3 crop. There's a crop, we haven't really talked about that, but you can crop the sensor down to a smaller area and it can shoot that at 60i, but that's the only one that you can shoot at 60i. Everything else is going to be limited. Using the entire frame on this camera is known as the DX sensor. You can also shoot with a smaller 1.3 crop on the sensor if you need to get in a little bit closer. Let's just say you don't have a big enough telephoto lens. That's an additional way to get a little bit closer to your subject, you might say. And so that's a choice that you'll be able to make in the image area option. Now, this is primarily a still photography machine, which means if you're in the video mode, if you're in the live view mode, it doesn't matter. You want to take a picture, you press down on the shutter release, you will get a still picture. The downside is that if you are in the video mode, it's going to be a 16:9 aspect ratio, and it's going to crop off a little bit of the top and the bottom with each frame that you shoot. And so it's not the best place to be shooting still pictures, but you can do it nonetheless. If you want, you can go back into a video and you can pull a frame out of it into a separate file. It's not a super high resolution image, it's not 24 megapixels, it's the resolution of the video that you're shooting. But you're able to actually extract that frame within the camera when you review the movie if you want. And so I can't stress this enough. If you want to shoot video with this camera, focus first, get it down, and then do your shooting. Stop the shooting, focus on the next shot. It's not the perfect video camera, that's not what it was designed for. But that is just a standard problem that we've been dealing with. And with some newer generation cameras, we're just starting to see some potential changes around that where the technology is catching up to our demands on the camera. But for this camera, not the greatest video camera in the world, but for a lot of people, it makes for a very nice video camera with very high image quality, just a little workaround on the autofocus.
A few questions before we leave the movie mode.
Yeah.
Mango7 in Washington, D.C. says, when I shoot video, I notice that the ISO jumps around depending on the light around, seemingly automatically. How does one manually control that?
It sounds like their ISO is set in the auto ISO setting right now. And so they just need to go back in and hit the ISO button, hold it down, and I believe it's turning the back dial on the camera and get out of the auto ISO mode.
Okay. And one with the camera asks, can you change the aperture in movie mode if you have a lens with an aperture ring?
You could physically change it if you have one of the older Nikon lenses that has a physical ring on it, yes, because there's nothing electronically stopping you. And so that's the one way to make it work.